Good evening and welcome. I'd like to call the January 15th City of Issaquah's Development Commission meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. As a reminder, we have a remote aspect to our meetings. This means both staff and members of the public may be participating in the meeting remotely via WebEx. For those attending remotely, if you have questions or issues, please send the host a chat message or email staff at kristenl@issaquahwa.gov. That's kristenl@issaquahwa.gov. Excused absence for this meeting is Commissioner Shore. Alternate member Ola Fazoon is filling in this evening as a regular member. Welcome, Ola. First item of business tonight is to take action on our minutes for December 4th, 2024. Hope we've all had an opportunity to review. Are there any corrections to the December 4th minutes in the agenda packet? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Yes. Commissioner Brennan.
Yeah, I don't have a correction to the minutes, but there was a question that was asked during the meeting. So I want to clarify the response to the question. Commissioner Morgan asked when we were talking about reviewing the rules of the commission, when we had what was a quorum and 4 is a quorum. And then the question was whether or not you needed 4 votes to pass a motion when you had, say, 4 members at the minimum of quorum. And the answer was yes. And actually the rules, I think it's in section 3, talk about when you have a quorum, which is 4 or more, that the majority vote represents the action of the commission. So you would need 3 votes. If you had a quorum of 4, you would need 3 votes to pass a motion, and that would be the commission. So I just want to make sure that that was clear for the commission and was paying that close attention to what we were talking about last time. But that would be not a correction to the minutes, but just a clarification that may be here in the minutes for this meeting response to that answer.
Thank you. Any other input, Commissioner Morgan?
Yeah, so the minutes were correct for what was said in the meeting. The question was, do you need 4 votes to pass? And the answer that answer.
That's correct. So the minutes represent the discussion, but the response, I wanted to clarify the responses. The actual rules of the commission are different than the response that we were given during that meeting.
Good, thank you. Any other discussion about that point or the minutes in general? Hearing no other comments, or the minutes then are approved as submitted and clarified. Next, I'd like to open the floor for any members of the public, in person or virtually, who'd like to make a general comment. Not about the Front Street Townhomes project, but on general topics. There will be an opportunity later in the meeting for those who'd like to comment on the project on tonight's agenda. Ms. Jackson, has anyone signed up to make general public comment?
No, sir.
Anyone online indicate they want to make general public comment?
No, sir.
Thank you. So we'll move on to our first regular agenda item this evening, pre-decision open record public hearing. The order of operation for the hearing will be as follows. First, the purpose of the public hearing, followed by our appearance of fairness disclosures. Then we'll open the public hearing with a staff presentation, followed by an applicant presentation. Floor will be open then for public comment. There will be an opportunity for rebuttal by applicant and then the staff. Then we'll close the public hearing. Commission deliberation will be followed by commission action, including motions, amendments, and vote. That will conclude the agenda item on the quasi-judicial permit. If for any reason the hearing can't be completed this evening, it may be continued to a specified date. Purpose of the public hearing. This is the formal public hearing for the Front Street Townhomes development. The proposal considered this evening is a site development permit application for a 27-unit residential development that includes 3 buildings and 1,482 square feet of commercial space divided between 2 buildings on Front Street North. The purpose of the hearing is to solicit relevant public comment and facilitate review, discussion, and decision on the application by the Development Commission. This is a quasi-judicial hearing, and so Ms. Medina, can you please proceed with our appearance of fairness disclosures?
Thank you, Commissioner. Just let me share my screen here. So I will go through the appearance of fairness portion of the presentation, and then we'll move on to the Front Street Townhomes. So this is a quasi judicial decision, which requires proceedings to be fair in fact and appearance. Ex parte contacts are prohibited. The test the test for this is, would a disinterested person, knowing the totality of the decision maker's personal interest in a matter, be reasonably justified in thinking that partiality may exist? So decision makers who have personal interest, prejudgment of issues, or partiality are disqualified from the proceedings. So there's a couple questions to go through here. So I will go through all these, ponder them as I go through them, and at the end, if your answer to any of them is yes, please let me know. So do you have a personal interest, financial or otherwise, in the outcome? Does
No.
your employer have an interest, financial or otherwise, in the outcome? Do you have any familial, social, or business relationships or connections with any of the parties or non-parties who have an interest in the outcome? Do you have any special knowledge about the substantive or the merits of this proceeding which you would or could cause you to prejudge the outcome? Will there be any prospective employment for you or your family as a result of this decision? Do you own or control property within 300 feet of the subject property? Have you any ex parte communications regarding this project? And lastly, do you believe you can sit and hear this matter fairly and impartially, both as a respective positions of the proponents and the opponents of this matter? Sorry. Does anyone feel that they cannot judge this impartially or answer yes to any of those questions?
I had a
No.
yes to one of the questions.
Which question?
I served on a board with the project architect about 8-9 years ago. Beyond that, we have no professional or personal relationship, but we did serve on a board together, and we do know each other.
Thank you for disclosing. Do you believe that you can sit and hear this matter fairly and impartially, both as to the respective positions of the proponents and the opponents of this matter?
Yes.
So then, questions to the audience members. Does anyone in attendance wish to challenge the participation of any commissioner based on the appearance of fairness doctrine? Raise your hand if yes. If anyone online has an objection, please raise your virtual hand or type objection into the chat window. Any objections? Thank you, commissioners. With that, we will move on to the staff presentation for the public hearing. Again, my name is Emily Medina. I'm an associate planner with the city of Issaquah.
Excuse me a moment, Emily.
Yes.
We are now officialing the public hearing portion of the meeting, and we're opening the public hearing at 6:41 p.m. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And I'll need to swear you in, actually.
Sorry.
Okay. Please state your name and position with the city for the record.
Emily Medina, associate planner.
You swear by oath or affirmation the testimony you are about to provide is true.
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. So again, Emily Medina, associate planner, and I am the planner on this project. I have been with it since the beginning of the pre-app all the way through to this hearing. So we will get into the details. So this project is located at 665 Front Street North. Most people are familiar with the site as it's next door to the Dairy Gold, and it currently contains the vacant Bank of America building along with the ATM drive-through on the rear portion of that site. It's in the Old Town sub-area, and it is zoned CBD and has a land use designation of retail. So what's being proposed for this site is three-story buildings. There's a total of 27 residential units. And then there's 2 commercials, which front Street North on the bottom floor of those 2 buildings. There's water, sewer, stormwater, and frontage improvements. And then there is an internal access road. It is a one-way, so you would access off of Front Street and then exit onto Holly Street. There is right-of-way dedication happening that you can see in that orange. It's about 10 feet of right-of-way dedication in order to improve Holly to meet our city's street standards. So the presentation, these sections are going to generally follow the staff report sections and looks at code compliance, our different design, parking, et cetera standards. So this is part of the 18600 of the Issaquah Municipal Code, site and building design standards. Staff believes that the project as conditioned meets all these urban design and site and building design standards. Architectural elements are provided, which includes projecting sills, brick belt coursing along the facade, lighting, potted plants. The buildings are oriented towards the adjacent transportation facilities. So a goal of our design standards is to create livable, pedestrian-friendly development, especially in Old Town. So the site is surrounded by sidewalks, and all of the front doors of both the retail and the residential portions of this project face those pedestrian access points. So all those main entries face the sidewalks, and then each unit has its own entry. So each is kind of its own townhome unit rather than a single entry multifamily type development. Each unit has weather protection at the entry. Example of what's proposed is on the slide. There's ground level transparency provided, which I will get into more later on the Old Town design standards. No blank wall extends longer than 30 feet. There's modulation and color changes in windows and balconies to provide a breakup of the facade, as well as changes in materials, and then the window patterns and colors provided help break that up. When it comes to these design standards, there is 2 recommended conditions to have this project comply to the design standards. The first is that wayfinding is provided and required on site, but the specifics of the sign have not been decided at this point. So one of the conditions is to have the wayfinding comply with the code, and it will be viewed and reviewed at construction permitting. And then the second is to, and I'm going to change slides here, just has a better image on it. The second is the 2 parking spots that you can see down here. Is to provide special paving material in compliance with the site design standards to have a pedestrian connection between those parking spots and the surrounding sidewalk, rather than, just to make that clear so there's not pedestrians walking down the one drive aisle, and just to adhere to that special paving standard that we have. Moving on to parking, the site complies with all of our parking requirements. We have minimum and maximum parking requirements now, as commissioners are aware, since we updated our SID standards. So the residential, the minimum would be 20, the maximum would be 54, 49 are provided, and then retail, 3 to 7 required and 3 are proposed. And the EV standards that require a percentage of them to be EV ready is met. For bicycle spaces, 6 short-term are required and 8 are proposed. And then 31 long-term are required and 31 are proposed. Those long-term are broken down into 27 residential and 4 commercial. For the residential, the long-term parking is provided in each unit's garage for the biking, and then the retail, it is above the retail south is the long-term parking. You can see that on the site plan. Landscaping and trees. The site meets all of its tree requirements. Tree retention is required at 25%, which would be 61 dBH required, diameter at breast height. So we measure trees not on based how many number there are, but the diameter of the trunks. So 61 is required and 64 is proposed to be retained. Canopy coverage for Old Town is required at 33%. And due to the number of trees that would be removed and the replacement that would be required to meet that canopy coverage, they are exceeding it by about 300 square feet of proposed trees. Landscaping, they meet their diversity standards. We require a certain percentage of plants to be native species on site. Spacing standards are met. We have different spacing for shrubs, trees, medium, small, large, ground cover. All of those have their own specific standards that are met. And all landscaping areas are meet the minimum of 100 square feet, which is important to make sure that we give trees and landscaping a chance to flourish. So that is all met. One item to note, as I know anyone who drives down Front Street since our storm would note on this site, is that many trees have fallen on this site. The trees that fell happened after staff approved this project. So it had already been signed off by all staffs. staff report had been routed to my superiors for review, and then the trees fell. So we are assessing this under the site that was in the site plan and the site that was in place when staff signed off. So that is met when staff signed off. Since then, the trees have fallen. An unknown number of trees, a lot on site, some of them required for retention. So part of the construction permit would be submitting an arborist report that shows those shifting tree numbers, but it is staff's stance that they meet their tree retention requirements based on what was submitted. Community amenity space is, they're exceeding the required common amenity space. 2,700 square feet is required, and 3,150 square feet is proposed. It's proposed along the south portion of the site, easily accessible by the pedestrian sidewalk. It has benches within it. It meets its minimum landscaping, which is 30%. We require common amenity space to be landscaped, and 68% is proposed. We have a certain number of seating units that benches are broken into that have to be met, and that is exceeded as well. Along with common amenity space, we require each unit to have private amenity space, which is 48 square feet per unit, and 48 square feet per unit is proposed. That is what the balcony serves as, is that private amenity space for each unit. And then wayfinding is provided on site in both the southeast and the northwest corners of the site. And as I mentioned before, there is a recommended condition about that to make sure that the wayfinding meets the design standard when we go to construction. And then building A, which is on the west side of the site, is oriented to face the park. So rather than the units facing into that new internal driveway, the units face out towards Rainier Boulevard and Confluence Park. So lighting is something that's largely reviewed with construction permitting. Just the technical aspects of lighting, photometric analysis, that kind of thing is looked at when we get to construction. But we are looking at the land use time at the design of the lighting, the location of lighting. So primary commercial entries, which are the two along Front Street, do include recessed lighting to highlight the entryways, which is a design requirement. And then lights visible from the adjacent sidewalks and street complement the existing Old Town lighting. So anyone who walks around Old Town, you know, we have the kind of rust-colored light posts with the scrolls. They exemplify our Old Town character. So the applicant is proposing this one here at the bottom, which has the kind of scroll at the top as the entryway light. And then these more, I don't know what you call it, farmhouse style lighting. But in that same rust orange color, they changed it to that color to better adhere to the Old Town character and kind of merge with what's existing on site or existing in the sub area. So along with our typical city design standards that apply to all sites, we also have the Old Town design standards, since this is located in the Old Town sub area. The CBD design standards apply, and these design standards supersede our other design standards. So if there is a conflict, it is the Old Town ones that overrule, which did come up a couple times with this project. So main high points of meeting the Old Town design standards: the front entries are pedestrian oriented. They have weather protection, and they include all the required architectural features. There's kind of a menu of options of developers to choose, like you got to choose 2 from Group A and 2 from Group B. I break it down in the staff report, but they meet that, and in some cases exceed that. Transparency is a large requirement in Old Town to just get that interaction with the street and have a nice streetscape for pedestrians. So 45.2% would be required of transparency along Front Street, and 48.3% is proposed. And then along Holly Street, 25% required, and 27.8% is proposed. In particular, the storefronts provide recessed windows, lighting, belt coursing, plasters, planters, and articulation, as they have that corner location. And all of that really helps meet those standards to create a lively streetscape that's very pedestrian oriented. And then all the buildings contain no more than 3 main colors. The plan set, which is Exhibit C that you all had access to, has the like a virtual, or not a virtual, a digital materials board, but we also have a physical materials board. Should any of the commissioners like to see that, let me know and I can bring that over to you. The project went through SEPA back in May. A DNS, determination of non-significance, was issued, and we received no comments on the SEPA and there's no critical areas on site, and all impacts are mitigated through either the code or through the proposed SDP conditions. Thank you. Is there any questions from me?
Mr. Chair, just a couple of quick questions.
Mr. Brennan?
for Emily. You mentioned at the end of the presentation and also in the staff report, the kind of reconciling the general development standards against the Old Town overlay requirement development requirements. And I think a lot of detail, and I appreciate what the architect did on the plans showing in comments about what part of the standards were being applied, but that was primarily around the retail spaces or the commercial spaces. So help me kind of reconcile myself. You have a lot of redundancy, like on Holly Street, but you're right on the edge of Old Town, right? Holly Street, I think, south or the north end of Old Town. So, but you have a lot of redundancy in the architecture, and the standards actually suggest you do otherwise. And so, trying to reconcile why we're kind of applying Old Town, I guess, primarily to the retail and development standards for the rest of the project.
So the Old Town standards are applied to the entire site, including the residential portion of it. When it comes to, as you're saying, it has a repetitive nature to the residential. It does meet the standards, as the standards require things like modulation, so popping the building in and out and having the different materials and colors. It does meet that in staff's opinion. It meets those requirements. Part of the challenge with this site is that the site is zoned CBD, so the commercial standards of the Old Town are being applied to the site, which is a largely residential development. So there is a little bit of a tension there of making sure it meets it. So it's staff's opinion that it does meet all the standards as written, but there is that kind of rub against the fact that it is a residential development going into what is a commercially oriented design code.
Yeah. I got the same as I was looking at it, and I was like, well, there's a tension, good term, a tension between those and discretion. You've got to apply some discretion here. So
Sure.
I understand. Thanks, I appreciate that answer. And then one more quick question, just regarding the tree retention, like surprise, that must have been fun to try to figure out now what do we do, since a lot of the trees that we're going to be, or several of the large trees that were retained are now. So then the thinking is that we're going to revisit that as part of the construction building permit process. But since the trees were kind of removed naturally, essentially there wouldn't be a tree retention requirement. I guess the standard would.
So there's a couple ways of thinking, and our planning team had a fun time with this one, talking this one through. So essentially what we got at with our sense of thinking is they have met their tree retention requirements. They redesigned their site in order to maintain those 3 large trees that used to. One of them exists now. In between the building and the ATM, they redesigned their stormwater. They met tree retention when we signed off on it. So our stance is they have met tree retention, acts of Mother Nature aside. But when they come in for their construction permits, so for their building and site work, we do require tree plans within that, as well as an arborist report. And the arborist will need to go back out and do a new tree inventory to see what's left and what has come down. And it may be that so many of the other trees fell down on site that they still meet their retention. But even if they don't, it's still staff's opinion that to approve it based on what was the original retention. However, we are going to require them to make sure they still meet canopy coverage. So they might have to plant more trees than originally thought in order to make sure that they're hitting that 33% projected canopy coverage that we want to see for Old Town.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Commissioner Ikeda?
Question on the SEPA. Does that include groundwater testing for hydrocarbons or PFAS?
They did a phase 1 environmental analysis. So SEPA doesn't specifically require that. Our stormwater engineer looks at the water and the standards of that and making sure they're meeting our MPDS permit and all those water things that I would not, I would not dive into, as I am not the expert on that. That would be Stacy Rush, our stormwater engineer. But if anything is not met, that would be addressed with construction permitting. It would again be reviewed. It's all stormwater's preliminary at this point, and it would be finalized as part of the construction permitting. As far as SEPA goes, the DNS comes from, we only do like a mitigated DNS, which has conditions on it. If it's going to prevent, mitigation measures should really only be, these mitigations are necessary to make sure this doesn't become an environmental impact statement. And there's nothing large enough issue on site environmentally that a mitigation measure was required to prevent it from elevating to an EIS level. But specifically about the water, that would be further looked at with construction permitting when they finalize the stormwater requirements.
So the phase 1 didn't find anything to trigger a phase 2, which would require testing?
Not as far as I'm
Okay,
aware.
thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Price.
Thank you. Would this be a good time to look at the material board? Just to pass it around.
I kind of popped some glue off, so be careful passing that around. The stones will go sliding.
Do a follow-up question out. I see us. Can I ask what number 17 is on the elevation?
On the elevation. Let me pull up the site plan so we can look at it together. And you said it was on the elevations on the,
Yeah, I was on the elevation page. I'm on page 22, which I assume is just paint. But I guess my question is, what is the actual material? Doesn't appear to be a lap siding or
sorry, just looking for the page. Did I pass it? So, yeah, I think it's just that not on the materials board.
well, there's a paint color, but it doesn't say what the material is. Is it a cement board, a hardy panel? It's just smooth and unarticulated.
Yeah, it's a painted cement board. It's a charcoal color.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you,
you
Kristen.
for the clarification.
Other questions while we're looking at the board? Commissioner Morgan?
Thank you. Belt coursing. Trying to understand exactly what belt coursing is, and ribbon, a line of bricks below windows separating floors. Trying to find belt coursing on the building. You
Yes.
point out where we
It
see
is
that?
proposed brick belt coursing. So I think part of what they're proposing for the belt coursing is this brick you see going around here. And the applicant can follow up during his presentation as well if I'm misinterpreting what I'm seeing. I think that refers to the brick that is surrounding on the retail portion of the buildings.
Like, so I guess I'd mean question the architect. Well, we'll have there.
One more time, sorry.
The architect will be, the applicant will be.
The
speaking
applicant
to-
will present
Yeah.
after me too,
Okay.
if you would like to dig into that with him as well.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess and one other question, we don't have the arborist is not here for the tree.
I do not believe so.
Okay.
No arborist tonight.
I guess I was partly curious on the trees selected. It looked like one of them can quickly grow to 100 feet or more. And do we ever look at that in terms of,
Sure. So
since we just had a bunch of tall trees blow down?
it's a great point. So we do have a city's preferred tree list that we require all trees to be selected from. And I was actually speaking to our arborist just 2 weeks ago following this about another project, but I think it's going to apply to all projects that some trees are changing on our preferred tree list. So when that comes in for construction permit, we'll make sure that that adheres to the preferred tree list that our city arborist puts together.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Fazoon?
Yeah, so my question was kind of similar to the question that the other gentleman had asked, which was with regards to the trees, especially the ones that had fallen in the past. So would the guidance be to replace with a similar tree in a similar location? Or potentially would it be younger trees that would give more canopy cover in the future?
So it will definitely be younger trees. It's likely that they'll replant where the trees were proposed to be retained, because that will be an open landscaping spot that is now treeless, that we would encourage them to plant trees there. So the trees that are selected will need to meet that canopy coverage. So however, we have a projected canopy coverage for the city's preferred trees, and then they go in and can select trees based off that, and whatever the canopy, adding all the canopy coverage together of the planted trees has to meet the criteria. So how many that will be is now going to change based on how many trees have fallen and the size of the trees that fell, since we base it on DBH rather than number of trees. So they'll be free to select any ones from that city's preferred tree list. I am not able to tell them that you have to plant a Douglas fir there. They can select any from the preferred tree list as long as it, and then we have size requirements. So any deciduous tree has to be 2-inch caliber, and any, the other type of tree that I'm blanking on, non-deciduous tree, conifer, evergreen, has to be 6 feet tall when they plant it. Did that answer your question?
It kind of does. So it's a combination is what you're saying, right? The age, the type, and then what I'm trying to get at is in the future, is it likely that we'll have a scenario where coverage will be more than it was before the damage?
Correct. It's likely they're planting more trees than currently exist on site, so it is likely that the coverage will be greater 20 years from now than it was today.
Right. I think that's what I was trying to get at. Thanks.
Other questions?
I have a question. What kind of retail spaces are anticipated to go in here? And I'm asking this question because there are only 3 parking spaces between them, and one of those is ADA, so there would be 1 parking space for each retail unit.
So the commercial tenant has not been selected. So when I was looking at the parking, I evaluated it based on what our parking requirements are, which are the same for retail, restaurant, coffee shop. They all, I can't remember, I list them all in the staff report. They all have the same parking requirements. However, whatever comes in to those spaces will have to apply for a tenant improvement building permit. And if for whatever reason there isn't enough, that will have to be addressed then, because they are required to meet the parking requirements. But I would say I am highly confident that they'll meet the parking requirements, because there's really limited uses that can go in along Front Street, because our permitted use table has a footnote that I mentioned in the staff report in that permitted use section, that only certain types of uses can go into those spaces along Front Street. And I believe that they pretty much align with the ones that I list in the parking requirements that meet this, that have the correct amount of parking spots that is shown. So as long as they meet the requirements, then it's approved.
Other questions? Okay, I have a couple, and they refer to the staff report, but also the code. They might want to reference those. So in the staff report, I'm looking at page 14, the staff report, or it's 22 of the 969. Top of that page, where it's referring to IMC 18700.075. that area. So that it says B complies. Commercial portions of buildings have primary entrances on Front Street and incorporate 4 of the required elements, including lighting as conditioned. And I guess that's condition 10, not 9, right?
Did I?
Yeah.
My apologies if so. I have a typo there.
That's okay. There are a few that cascade like this, so I think one was inserted maybe around 8 or something like that. So. And it also refers to belt coursing, pilasters, which I assume is pilasters, and pot. Okay. So I don't see pilasters referred to in the code. And I'm looking at 18700-075B1. Right there in that list, yes.
You are correct. It's not on that list.
And I don't see pots, flower pots in the design, so I assume those are to be added, although they're not on the elevation currently.
I believed in the elevation that it did have, it was not shown, but it was shown as selected. It is drawn out. So then that will, when it comes in for construction permitting, we'll make sure that
Okay,
the pots are
okay,
there.
okay.
Correct.
Just not shown there yet.
Correct. But you're correct. That's not on there. But
Yeah, so I guess we're missing one element. We're adding ornamental brackets for lighting, right? That is the
Correct.
condition 10. And we have the belt coursing.
and it has the pots. So
And
since
the
2 are only
pots.
required, it still meets it. But you are correct. I listed one that is not within this section.
I thought it was at least 4 are required.
Oh, yeah, Front Street or East Sunset must 4. So ornamental brackets for the lighting, which I conditioned, the belt courses, and the plants. So
Okay, so we may have a condition coming on that. So, yeah,
Correct.
okay, good. And then the other question that I had in the staff report was on page 16, section 7, summary of technical reviews, looking at traffic and circulation there. And I guess a general comment. So thinking of circulation through this project, you enter off Front and you exit only onto Holly, right?
correct.
And I think the transportation report says anticipated to be distributed with the majority of traffic onto Front Street North going north, followed by Northwest Holly going east, and then Front Street North going south. So we're thinking of most of the traffic coming out of this is going to be on Front Street North, right? Probably heading toward I-90.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
think out onto Holly and then onto Front Street North.
Yeah, well, is the signage on Holly going to be changed? Because currently that is a no left turn.
That's a great question. I'm actually
cannot
not sure the
turn-
answer. I'd have to talk to our engineer on
Yeah,
that
I'm
one.
pretty sure you cannot turn left from Holly onto Front at this point. I was wondering how that would work. And yeah, I don't believe you can. So then I guess the route out of there to I-90 would be you'd head off on Holly onto Rainier. You'd have to take Rainier north and then get on Juniper for a short stretch, and then you're in the Scramble intersection right across from Gilman Loft. And that traffic would then be diverted onto Gilman. You head over to Front and turn left to get to 90. And I guess my concern is about that intersection, because that's an unusual intersection, to say the least, and there's no right turn on red there. So I'm wondering if we've looked at that and if we have confidence that that still operates at a level of service D, if that's what's going to be happening.
Right. So the traffic study does evaluate the intersections around it, but I will confirm with both our CPD engineer and our public works engineer that that's been properly evaluated and considered.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Morgan?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Just looking at the architect's plans, and they reference on the requirements, A, lighting, C, belt coursing, D, pilasters, H, pots. And the pilasters that they mentioned, the D is actually in the code, is actually plinths or columns. And when I look up a plan, a pilaster is a rectangular vertical wall piece that looks like a flat column. The base of a pilaster generally includes a flat block called a plinth. So I wonder if a plinth and a pilaster go together.
Commissioner Brennan, I was thinking the same thing that it was, oh, sorry, Commissioner Morgan. I think it was maybe a terminology switch on their part, and I transposed that into my staff report.
Yeah. But maybe it meets it now, it looks like.
Comment on that, if that's the case, and I'll ask the applicant, when the applicant is presenting, where any plinths would be on that, because I don't see any plinths in that drawing at all, no. That's a larger base, kind of a classical architectural feature, is my understanding. But anyway, that'll be for the applicant.
To discuss with the applicant, and then if we want to add a condition, the commissioners can do so, and I'll draft it up for the final motion.
Commissioner Arcata?
A follow-up to Chair's discussion on transportation. Just, this may be premature, but has there been planning or discussions about haul routes for the demolition of the C-First building, construction activities? How you're going to access the site from Front Street during high peak times, and then as a follow-up would be site laydown areas. This may be premature, but
Yeah, that's done with the construction permitting, so not at this time. We haven't discussed it with the land use permits, but our engineers and our building plans examiner and inspectors will be having those discussions.
Other questions? Commissioner Faison?
Yeah, so the question I had was about the non-native species for planting versus native. Can you share a little bit about the rationale for the demarcation? Talking about on page 55, where it seems like there are some non-native species
Page
for
50.
shrubbery proposed. So this is on that big, massive document.
Oh, in the agenda. Let's see if I can find it in our plan sheet. So we have a percentage required. If I need to look in the code, but off the top of my head, I believe it's 30% have to be native species. And beyond that, non-native species are allowed to be selected. Are you looking at the, I'm sorry, I don't
I'm
have.
looking at the 969 page that was shared in the agenda. But yeah, it's right after this, I think.
This,
Scroll
the
down.
landscape, the,
Yeah.
oh, this.
Yeah, exactly right. This is
All
the
right.
page. Yeah, so I think the teal is considered.
Non-native.
Yeah, non-native proposed. And I just wanted to know what that was about, if, what's the rationale behind even selecting or allowing non-native species to be planted. It's further down, the next page.
I was looking at so on the landscaping plan, it gives a legend of what exactly is being planted there. So I was just going to confirm what that is. That teardrop shape is just ground cover. So, I mean, what's the rationale behind allowing non-native species?
Yeah.
It's our code language. I wasn't present for writing that kind of code, Kristen. I don't know if you were there when it was written, but I think requiring 100% native species probably comes down to probability and cost, and having a great enough selection of plants to be able to put different types of grass and shrubs and trees and such on site. When it comes to development projects, my role is to implement the code as it's written, and in this case, it only requires 30% native, so all I can require and ensure they do is that 30% native.
Okay.
So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you on that one. I'm sorry.
Any other question?
Yes,
Commissioner Morgan?
Just a comment with regard to the native. I think they have a incorrectly identified which are native, non-native. The planting legend and schedule, they discussed the non-native tree is the London plane. It is the London plane trees. I believe between the number's correct, but between the locations of them, they might be misidentified.
I will double check
I
that with
might
the
have that
permit.
off, but it was trying to match the two diagrams, one to the
Sure,
other. but
sure.
Yeah,
I will double check that.
yeah.
Other questions? No other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Now we'll proceed with the applicant's presentation. Now we'll need to swear you in. Please state your name for the record.
Kevin Merriman.
And do you swear by oath or affirmation the testimony you're about to provide is true?
I do.
Thanks. Please proceed.
All right. First, I'd like to thank everybody for taking time today to have this meeting. My presentation is probably going to be shorter than Emily. She did such a great job, but I'm available to answer any questions. I'll state before this that I wasn't the designing architect on this job, so I might not have all the questions, but I have the ability to get those. Front Street Townhomes. Emily kind of went through this. Just a little background on us. You can go to the next one. Turning spaces into places is part of the founding message for our company. And I think when we saw this Bank of America property, we saw an opportunity to turn a space into a place for gathering, a place for people to live, to own homes, to be connected to Confluence Park and Front Street. And so during the design of this project, we kept all that in mind and really worked with Emily and her team to make sure that we kind of met the vision of what living next to Front Street in Issaquah near Confluence Park would mean. So that's sort of a little background on kind of what we tried to do with this. We're excited about this project. Next one, existing conditions. As everyone knows, it's the old Bank of America property. Our hope is to take this from this commercial area and turn it into kind of a vibrant community. You're going to see the very similar site plans, 27 units, 3 buildings, 2 retail spaces, 2 guest parking, 3 retail parking areas along Northwest Holly and Front Street. Again, we've seen this one before, so Emily got to this before me, but this is a kind of a layout of how we oriented these buildings. As Emily put it, we did a great job of orienting the entrances outward so that there's nobody facing in for their front entrance, or there's no people, visitors that are having to walk down a driveway to get to a house. So we wanted to make sure that it was safe and it was pedestrian friendly and had connection to from Front Street all the way through the project out to Northwest Holly and then on to Confluence. Elevations, I think we've seen these and I think there will be questions. We tried to do our best job to fit within the code while also creating a project that we can be proud of. If we drove by it, that's sort of what we do for everything. Whether it's along Front Street, Northwest Holly, making sure that it's as people are driving by, it's a project that they look at, kind of gives them the wow. A couple of other elevations here. I think we've seen all of these through staff presentation, so I won't hit these again. Sustainability. A lot of these are requirements we have to hit for multifamily or other types of buildings, but we do keep that in mind, and especially with regards to tree retention and planting after. I know that we've talked about the trees that went down during the storm. The plan, we have had an arborist out. We're also going to have someone out to clean those up. And the arborist report will be able to tell us canopy coverage and if in any way it drops below the recommended amount, which is 33% canopy coverage, which would end up being 13,000 square feet of canopy coverage approximately, then yes, it would be within the code to plant new trees. So Like I said, short and sweet. The staff report pretty thorough, and I thought they did a great job. So, any questions?
Commissioner Brennan?
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. So on the south property line, you've got your adjoining neighbors, pretty intense commercial use. And there's a lot of the kind of the community space that's provided along there. Can you describe a little bit more? It's hard for me to get from the plans what the environment's actually, what the buffer or separation between the properties is going to look like or feel like, really, when you're walking down and gaining access into those units.
Yeah, and so there's a grade difference between those two. So there's an existing wall and fence there. There's also going to be the ground cover, and then there's going to be trees planted along between the pedestrian path and the houses to help shield, that, so that there's less visibility and there's sort of a natural buffer between those.
So I'm not familiar with the topography of the site. So
Yes.
how much grade difference between the property we're considering here and the neighborhood?
It ends up changing throughout as you go from east to west, and there's a couple feet. Yeah.
Okay, so then you're proposing a fence or a wall, then landscaping is?
It's existing as it is today. Yeah.
So it's a fairly strong visual separation. I mean, will you be looking at the side of semis as you're walking down the path?
In our opinion, there'll be a good visual separation. That was the intent of having those entrances out there, is that we have set up what we believe to be a good separation between the residences and those pre-existing use.
And then a couple of little more detailed questions here.
Sure.
So you have one of the requirements in the staff report was to identify on the property at building permit where you're going to have loading and unloading occur that's not in the driveway. And I'm having a hard time identifying where that might be on the property. Have you given that thought?
So there is an area that we work with planning on that's highlighted yellow on your sheet. And this is going to be for temporary, the thought is Amazon. And not that, and I don't think there's going to be, I think every Amazon driver or delivery driver is going to end up stopping in a different spot. But within the code, we did provide an area for them to stop. I don't have any preconceived notion that they're going to use that. So we tried to provide it. If it's used, it's used.
The other thinking, though, is residents move in and move out requires space. So where would that occur on the property?
So that's going to occur, within each unit as they're moving in and out. My thought is that they're going to be, for temporarily, this is a 20-foot wide drive aisle, that temporarily you may have a U-Haul or a truck parked up close to a garage as they're unloading.
That can be a conflict, just from experience. You know what
Yes.
you're talking about. Those are the questions.
Commissioner Fazoon?
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
In your promotional material, you mentioned salmon friendly. And I wanted to clarify, was that in your building practices above and beyond what our code stipulates, or is it the building itself? And can you touch on some of the practices that you're referencing there?
Yes, and so in our buildings that we build, and most of the time these are multifamily buildings, there's a certification called Salmon Safe. And that's a certification that you can get, and it's the level that the stormwater and runoff from your site, the level of how clean it is when it's leaving. So we have a building in Seattle that's branded as, it's been certified as Salmon Safe. We also have one in Redmond that's going to be the same. So it's just a practice of a lot of it's with bioretention. So again, not necessarily, these aren't branded towards for sale residential, unfortunately, but we put that in there to kind of show, here's what we do take sustainability and sustainable practices into account as we're designing.
It's just a follow-up. So is this development salmon friendly or safe, like with the definition that you provided with the building in Redmond, or would it be
So
considered that, or?
That's a commercial certification. This one will comply with all codes and Issaquah standards.
But wouldn't have that designation
Yeah,
as
it would not.
salmon friendly. Okay, thank you.
Any others? Commissioner Gilbert?
Going back to what Commissioner Brennan was saying about the fence, do you have any photos of that fence? Is it like what's the material?
I do not have any photos
Okay.
of that fence. I'd have to go. I don't have anything on me, but chain link with the slats, plastic or so.
But you're anticipating enough vegetation that nobody, like how long, well, I guess, will it take until it's not really visible? Because I'm asking because there are those benches out there and it's facing the fence. And so, and that's the communal space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we do have to plant certain size DBH trees, and so I think the caliper is 2.5 to 3 inches on most of those, and so they will have general foliage on them. I don't know the exact heights of what's going in, but the trees are within city standard and in a lot of ways exceeding it.
Excuse me, will the couple please take your discussion outside? Excuse me, will the couple in the audience, please take your discussion outside? We're having a bit of confusion with this. Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, I have a couple. And I guess this refers to the plan set. I'm on page 10 of 23 in the plan set. And I think I'm referring here to a point that Commissioner Brennan raised earlier about the facade that faces Holly Street.
Okay.
This would be Building B facing north into Holly. So there's a lot of visual repetition in that facade. And I was wondering if there is any opportunity for any kind of visual variation to break that up. It seems like that's the only facade that doesn't have alternating colors or door locations and so on in it. I understand you're limited to 3 primary colors to work with there. I wonder if you have any ideas about how those could be used to break it up. Maybe we'll see. That's the facade I'm talking about right there.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the point on that, is that we only have 3 colors to choose from for the project and on these facades. So we tried our best to stay within the code. I think there's always, when you get creative, you can say, well, let's put a bunch of different colors, but we have to stick with 3. And I'm not sure that this elevation maybe is showing the differences between those when you're looking at it kind of in person on these boards.
Yeah, I guess I wonder, for the interior facing portions of these buildings, there's variation in the coloring per unit. And I wonder if anything like that is possible, easily done on the other facade, meeting the code. I know you can't have transitioning colors that are of the same material over a long space. But I think maybe we'll come back to this in our discussion and deliberation. I guess no solutions are really jumping out at us right now.
And I think there's, within the code and within these, I'm sure there's creative ways to do this. I'm not saying that we can't. I'm not the architect on this one, so Don't want to speak for their group, but of course.
Okay, and so on, I think it's on the same sheet, the retail area that faces Front Street. The code refers to providing visual interest and engaging the community and in a way that is consistent and inviting with the rest of the CBD. And it's certainly an attractive design of the retail end there, but it strikes me as a little cool and a little not Old Town. I was wondering if there are any ideas, maybe we'll return to this in our deliberation as well, to add some color or a little bit more variation and warmth to that.
Okay, yeah, with these designs, we tried to stay within the very specific Front Street standards, and I think Emily in her presentation kind of pointed towards that of that we hit those, and I think we are also working with the materials and colors that we're using throughout the rest of the project to try and make this as beautiful and inviting as we can. And it ends up being, I think, these discussions are always subjective to the person, and so it's hard to I guess make everybody happy. We try to just do the best we can.
Right, it's a very appealing design in general, but maybe we'll circle back to that in deliberation later on. I had just one more, accessible parking spaces. Are there 3 total that I saw in there? 2 by the retail and 1 at the west end of Building C. Is that it?
I have to look at the standard. Is there an ADA? It's what?
The number of ADA required spots is a building code standard, so that will be addressed with the building permit to ensure that there's enough.
Okay, yeah, I think I saw 3, but I wasn't sure on that. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Morgan.
I guess just one note with regard to that east facade, if you could pull that up again, possibly. Just one, sometimes I think simple suggestion, not expensive, is to provide some tiebacks to the canopies that can sort of break up that and give it some Old Town flavor without a lot of expense.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments of the applicant? So hearing no other questions, thank you. And we'll now move on to the public comment portion of the hearing. Ms. Jackson, has anyone signed up to comment on this topic?
No, they have not.
Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak regarding this topic, this project? Okay, thank you. Does the applicant have any rebuttal to the comments that we've heard from Commission this evening? And does staff have any rebuttal to comments or questions from Commission? Thank you. Commissioners, are there any objections to closing the public hearing at this point? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing at 7:37 p.m. So now it's time to move into our deliberation portion of the meeting. Any discussion from the commissioners? Commissioner Price.
I just want to build on your last comment regarding, regarding the facades, moreover. So arguably, this is the gateway to Old Town. And it does a really good job of checking all the boxes. It prescriptively performs very well. I think the residential components especially perform very well. Then I get to the subjective ones, which is the intent of the Old Town standard is to preserve and enhance the traditional downtown core and historic character of the area. So I guess my question is, and what is striking to me is the commercial aspect of it, and does it meet the intent of the Old Town Standard on that facade? When I look at it, I see a very contemporary building. I'm not saying that, you know, these standards aren't very prescriptive in style, so there is some freedom there, other than to say the intent of the Old Town Standards is to preserve and enhance. So I guess the question I'd put to the commission is, are we preserving and enhancing, especially where the commercial is concerned? Because that's really the face of this, that the community will experience, public at large. So I think that's, for me, something I want to put out there.
Really appreciate your perspective as architect. I think that summed it up very well.
Well, I think the front facade looked very disjointed from the side facade, just stylistically, and it looks like two separate buildings to me that are combined. Yeah, and that's really the first. And I think that would be noticeable from the street as you're driving down. Everybody who drives down is going to look, and they're going to see both of those two views, and it doesn't quite look cohesive to me. That's
To Commissioner Gilbert's point, I would agree with that. However, the code is different for commercial buildings facing front than it is for residential. So I think that gets to this issue of, you know, it's that line between how do you satisfy both of those and yet have a coherent presentation.
true.
Commissioner Gilbert.
Oh, if I can make one more comment.
Go ahead.
That residential building also faces the front too, and so then it's both residential and retail, and so there is a lot of tension there.
In looking at that, you know, I was trying, like Commissioner Morgan, to try to come up with a fix that won't break the bank on this project. And there is an overhang canopy there, and it's just a horizontal canopy. And I noticed that some other buildings on Front Street, I'm thinking of the bank building right now, has a similar kind of canopy, but it's a different color. You know, it's a teal color. And I'm wondering if a different kind of color used for that canopy might work, something complementary in there that, you know, be attractive, break it up a little bit, lighten it a bit. And also, we're seeing these commercial spaces without any kind of signage on them. And I guess when there are businesses in there, the odds are good they're going to have signage on the window. I guess that'll make it a little bit more engaging. Plus, there's the condition about hanging the ornamental lighting by the side of the door there that we're not seeing yet. I think I understand that. I think that's part of that retail design. Yeah. So, Commissioner Brennan.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts soliciting here. So it is, I agree with Commissioner Price, kind of assessment's a more contemporary looking design. Maybe there are some things that we're not getting in these elevations. 2 dimensions project when it was a little different, but in general, I think it's more edgy. But you think about Front Street and the buildings along, pretty, a lot of different styles of things, awnings, signage. So this is a challenge because it is very subjective, but the code's been satisfied. I mean, code violation. But I don't have there's not an element that I would need to add this. It's be kind of throwing our. So this is a hard one for me. I think I think that overall design is strong. It is separated from the rest of Front Street. This is at the north end. Commercial. It sits by itself. I don't know. I don't have a idea, I guess, to throw at it. Primarily.
Other comment? Commissioner Cato?
From Commissioner Brennan's point of view, if you look at Google Earth, there is quite a separation of function between the proposed site and you go into the Marigold and there's a large parking lot. It's hard, sometimes it's hard for me to draw the tie between Front Street, eclectic architecture, then you have an industrial area, then you come in here. It's a tough, it's kind of difficult. It'll be difficult for you to tie it together. Either you want to be separate, make it tie together. I'm not sure how this will work. And that's coming from an engineer.
Any other comments? So I don't probably hear a condition coming, but maybe you get the general tenor of our feeling about the retail spaces facing front. Commissioner Morgan.
I guess one possible condition would be to would be to instruct the applicant to work with staff on the Front Street facade to provide some measures of, I don't know if it's softening, something like that. I mean, it's very geometric patterns, and it's got brick, it's got wood, it's got a lot of Old Town materials there, but fairly contemporary. And I do think even just adding a diagonal tie back to facades can break up the, and I'd be happy enough saying that they would just work with staff to come up with some potential changes to that front facade.
I think we all agree that it needs something. And we're having trouble specifying what it is, and we don't really want to specify what it is, but to work with me satisfies. Commissioner Price?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I don't want to play designer, I don't want to be the designer, but I think find a way to work with staff to make it feel like one building and still meet the intent of the Old Town standard, which, you know, admittedly, it checks a lot of boxes. It also is pretty wide open in terms of design criteria for Old Town. So I think the most glaring for me is it doesn't feel like the same building, and can it be more cohesive from commercial to the residential? I think that would just make for an overall better building. That's just my.
It's okay if I throw in my opinion too, because I tend to think it could be different from a Front Street building to a Hawley residential, front commercial Hawley residential. I personally don't think it's necessarily a problem to have those appear to be two different buildings, because I think historically a lot of times buildings were built that way, with if there was commercial in front, residential behind.
Other comment? Any further discussion? With deliberation concluded, it's time for the commission to take action on the item before us. Is there a motion on the item before the commission?
Mr. Chair, I move that the Development Commission approve the site development permit for the Front Street Townhomes SPD 240002 as described and evaluated in the staff report dated December 31st, 2024, with exhibits A through O, subject to the conditions therein, and as amended tonight. And I move that the Development Commission direct the Community Planning and Development Department to prepare findings of fact and conclusions for review, approval, and that by the Development Commission Chairman affirming the Development Commission's decision to approve the Front Street Townhomes SPD 240002, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated December 31st, 2024, with exhibits A through O, subject to the conditions therein, and as amended.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion on the main motion? In time for any conditions here. Commissioner Morgan.
Mr. Chair, I move we add condition 11. It would state the applicant shall work with staff on the design of the east facade of the building. Take measures to soften the facade or make it more coherent with Old Town building.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Discussion on the condition.
Sorry, go ahead.
Commissioner Fazoon?
Kind of a vague directive. Is that intentionally vague, or did you want to clarify? It's hard to interpret or give action without, I think we need to clarify a little bit better so that they can satisfy it. I think that's, it's very vague.
I mean, I feel that, but I'm not sure what your words to use necessarily. If they're better than to soften and so forth. But I don't feel like I have something specifically I want to tell them they need to do.
Well, soften is subjective, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the.
If I may, Commissioner, that
Please.
condition would be very difficult for me to implement because I wouldn't have enough. I wouldn't have enough guidance of what you're looking for to make sure that it's done.
Well, I guess, can we reasonably impose a condition that's not code-based? Is that what we're bumping up against? Because we can all introduce some ideas here, right? But, unless it's actionable, but can it be actionable unless it's well grounded in the code? And I just go back to the Old Town standard. And you don't have much there to stand on. They've satisfied the code, other than to say, could it be a more cohesive, coherent building that enhances and preserves the traditional downtown core? Well, that's wide open. So I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a really tough one.
So may I make a recommendation? That, so for example, paint colors. Paint colors, you can only use 3, but materials don't count towards the colors. Stains don't count toward the colors. So if you were to say something like, work with the architect to include more stain or more wood in the development, in the facades of these 2 buildings to make them consistent.
And
Or
accent
something more
colors.
specific like that would work, and even if it's a
Accent colors
menu.
are also allowed, is that correct?
Pardon me?
Accent colors are also
No.
allowed, correct?
No, not anymore. They used to be, but they're not anymore.
I see.
But the woods and different materials don't count toward colors either, so
Yeah.
those can be included. So if you were, or to choose from a menu and say, and for one example, you all had a question about 3 items being selected from a menu that were included and not 4. Maybe it's to please add 1 more item, of your choosing. Just more specific like that would work than to soften.
Well, to add to that, thank you. That's good feedback, and it gives us something to work from. I think if I was to add to that, then I would say consider consistency in the facade treatment for both retail spaces as it wraps the corner. Consider using brick in its entirety so it feels cohesive. Eliminate the hardy panel right out of the gate, and or just introduce fine grain materials that just aren't. I think hardy panel evokes a sense of inexpensive and not having lasting integrity. So something that has lasting integrity that is akin to what you would find, whether it's wood, whether it's, I guess, a natural material is another.
Do you think we need to address that in addition to specifying the 4th element? Because that was a condition I was going to get to, that the 4th element will be required there. We have the hanging lanterns, we have the belt coursing, we have the other elements there that are there now, and I have the intention to require that 4th element that's currently missing. So if we add that 4th element, would that satisfy our debate? here? Would we have enough in the front? Or would we still have the sense that it's not sufficient staging? And there we're talking about probably.
Sure.
Suggestion, Commissioner Morgan, could you let me know if this satisfies the intent of the aim of your condition or not? A fourth required element will be added to the primary commercial entrances from the list of elements in IMC 18700-075 P1. That's the list of elements from which they had to have 4 present, and there are currently only 3.
I think that's something we should have anyway, just to make sure that it was a misstatement in their plans, that they're meeting that. I don't know if it would do without identification, I'm not sure if it would give that entrance remove the geometric vertical and horizontal nature of that facade.
If I may, commissioners, they're going to have 4 elements anyways to meet code. That's a code requirement. So that they're missing one is something that I've noted and will be required when they come in for building permit. So as Kristen said, if there's a specific element that you would like to see that you think is cohesive, otherwise you can make that condition, but I'm going to require it anyways as a code requirement.
So is there a requirement for the commercial roofs to have extended parapets? I'm looking at 18.700.060.
So in looking at 060, this comes with that tension like we're talking about. So staff's interpretation was B2, a predominantly residential use. So focusing on the pitched roofs with a minimum of 1.4 slope.
You could pull up the east facade.
This one you're talking about, Commissioner Morgan?
No,
The commercial,
Right
right?
Oh, the
there.
commercial.
Right there, yeah.
yeah, and if you can zoom in on that. I guess one of the questions, I think the idea of the plinth and the possibility there could be at the bottom columns of there's the gray material on the left, the gray material on the right, and the gray material on the right side of the entryway. And I don't see any, I think that's where the plinths would be if we match up with what code requires. If maybe plinths there could be identified as the 4th element, and that might help break up that front.
Having a condition specifying the location would also
Yeah,
be good and help staff actually implement what you want to see.
right. That makes sense?
A follow-up question about the cornices, or I guess the extended parapets. Were you trying to address the cornice treatment potentially of those lower elements?
No, I believe some of them have rather small cornices, I think, for buildings on Front Street, but I was looking for another element that could be added there that would add the kind of, engaging Front Street-like feel. It doesn't look really practical looking at this diagram. Probably the plinths would work if the architects can see that as part of the design. Sure. Would certainly. So I guess Commissioner Morgan, could you restate your condition to incorporate that and make us very specific?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to restate condition 12 to state that the fourth required element for the east facade shall be plinths acceptable to staff located at 3 locations on the far left and the 2 columns surrounding the entry.
Further discussion?
In addition to the east facade treatments, can we just also point out that it needs to wrap the corner, because it is a corner site, and that commercial does wrap that corner to the north elevation as well on the commercial level. Just saying east to west, or east to north.
Could we take a look at the full Front Street, like across the parking lot, both of those retail units, commercial units?
Both the frontages of the proposed retail units?
Yeah, do we have a view of those all together?
I believe they're on separate pages, unfortunately. So as well, they are on separate pages, so have to flip back and forth, unfortunately.
Can I go off topic really quick? Sorry. Is the reason there's no windows in the residential elevation there because that's a firewall? Would there not be a requirement to have windows?
There's not a requirement to have windows there. Why there's no windows there, I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
Commissioner Sanford, did you record the 12th condition, or I wrote it down if you want me to show what I wrote down to make sure it accurately
Please.
reflects for me to incorporate that into our staff report?
Please, I guess we'll do that at this time. I don't know if we're totally settled on it, but it would help to be able to see it so we can
Visualize
comment on it.
what we got. Please let me know any edits. I was typing fast without looking while you were talking. I believe it's the east
let's see.
retail facade or commercial facade.
I think I'd have to change that actually to 5 locations. I was looking at just the northern retail building, not the southern, and there would be 2 columns surrounding the entry on the southern building as well.
For each of the retail facades. So the condition applies to both retail north and retail south.
Correct. I think that would be a total of 5 locations. So it would be the 5 locations, 2 on either side of the entries, and 1 on the south corner of building A.
On either side of the entry, you walk me through. So either side of the entry is 4, and then the 5th one is the
Locations of either side of each entry and the southeast corner of Building A. I have that right.
Just look at Building A to make sure we're all looking at the same one.
Or, I'm sorry, Building B.
Building B.
Building B, yeah. I think that works. That works. Okay. That'll work for you.
That'll work for staff. That's implementable.
Any other discussion of that condition? All in favor of the condition, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Condition passes. Any other condition or amendments?
Mr. Chair, I'd like-
Commissioner Morgan? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still looking at the south property line buffer, the neighboring property. I'm concerned that there's not a lot of landscaping in the buffer. We have a fence that is an existing fence that's more commercial in nature, mainly plastic slats. We've got ground cover and then looks like 6 trees kind of spaced along that fairly long property. I don't have the. Seems like, given the nature of that space, that it's the communal space and it's a public walkway as well, that we should do something that creates a more natural buffer instead of relying. I don't know how the commissioner adding some additional language to kind of strengthen that buffer. Using it. I think that the use to the south is very, very different. This is a emphasis in the open space required code. Just want to make sure that and we've got benches sitting there and sitting on a bench staring at primarily great that we could do more cost project to increase visual separation. So I would propose an amendment to the condition. 13?
13.
That, again, this would be working with staff, but to work with city staff to strengthen the landscaping buffer along the south property line, creating a visual separation that primarily is created with landscape planting. So the point is the majority of that separation is using plant material, really relying on the
Discussion of the condition. Do we have a second?
A second?
Discussion.
If I may interject.
Commissioner Fizoon?
Oh, so I guess clarifying, you're asking that they plant trees in addition to, not trees, but maybe evergreen or
It could
something
be-
similar adjacent to the fence and height of the fence or
So the plan shows, and there's some, obviously there's, let the
interpretation.
landscape architect do
Yeah.
this, but the current plan shows really ground level plantings,
Right.
just ground cover
With-
and then
with
6
the-
trees,
yes,
and then a fence.
the fence.
Yeah,
So you're envisioning sort of head
right, some taller plantings in
taller
there to really
hedge
screen
that
the
kind of
fence.
screens the
so we're not
fence,
relying so heavily on
covers the fence,
Not that you
hides
have-
the fence.
Well, I don't know that I'd say completely hide the fence, but you want to increase the amount of vegetation. You want to formalize that a bit more. A fence is kind of an edgy, especially
would hop plant.
I'm not a
Or
landscape professional.
pyramidalias? Could you just do pyramidalias all along there? You know, they're vertical, green, evergreen plants that essentially creates a fence-like.
Good, I don't know that I would, that's that as, I would, again, leave some discretion here. Create a, you know, more interest, instead of just having one type of climate.
So again, I think with that also we need to clarify, because you can spend very little or a lot to meet what you're intending. Right? You could ask that they put some mature hedges that covers all of that, or they could put perennials that, you know, nest on the fence and die at the end of the kind of.
So the performance criteria that I try to build into this job is that the majority of the screen would be with. So it doesn't specify, I don't want to specify type of plant, but I don't want the fence to be pretty green. And that's the way to. So that was my point. If there's some additional amendment.
I just wanted to clarify your intent. Sort of, and then I might suggest.
Sure. No, thank you.
Commissioner Brennan, if I may have staff input a bit on this. Just a couple concerns come to mind, which is trees have to be planted a certain distance apart to ensure their roots are healthy. We don't want to overcrowd sunlight, etc. And then as well, if you're wanting to see landscaping to screen the fence, for lack of a better term, I would encourage specific language around the height of landscaping, whether you're looking for ivy or a growing vine up the side. If you are to just say landscaping, grass is landscaping, and that's not meeting your intent.
So the idea was to create a visual separation of property. So I think it would be with landscaping that is at maturity would be equal or higher than height. So I don't want to, again, I'm not a landscape architect, specify it. I think that would be too limiting. But the idea here is to actually screen the fence with landscaping, so we're not just.
So my concern with maturity, the interpretation is that you want tall trees, or, you know, trees that are at the height of the fence, they're mature, and you know, a vine could meet that intent as
Yes,
well.
a
So
vine
it could
could
be
meet
a
that
vine.
Could be a vine.
Could be a vine, but also the difficulty in choosing vines also is they could overcrowd, right? So that's another cost. So it has to be a vine that's not ivy.
Correct. Yeah, we wouldn't want to choose an invasive species
Not
that's going to go
invasive.
crazy. And also, I think maybe part of your intent, are you looking for 100% screening? I'd better not see that chain link fence, or
No.
just at least partial screening of the fence. Look at our landscape code for some visual.
That it was, that the screening was, let's just say the majority of the screening is provided. So that's more than 50%, more than 50%.
I had a question about that, actually. So what if they had better fencing, like more aesthetic fencing?
No, I don't think that would. You can have a combination. You can, so you're trying to create an environment that's a comfortable space. You want to sit and there, that's what it is. And the way I visualize it now, you've got 6 trees, ground cover, bench. So it's pretty. So you can plant, there's shrubs that grow tall. You can do rhododendrons. Get relative There's a number of different plantings that create a more pricing.
So I was just pulling up our landscaping code here as a reference, which we have these type visual buffers that can maybe help you identify what you're looking for. Typically, if a new parking lot was going in, we would require screening of that parking lot. Obviously, Dairy Gold's parking is the existing use. So to me, it kind of sounds like you're getting at the reverse of that, is let's screen their parking with kind of what we would require if it was going in now. Which,
Yeah.
let's see what that is.
Sorry, if you go back up, so that was what I was trying to describe. The very first section view, that is expensive. You know,
Which, I don't know
it's a
what you're pointing-
mature,
which one are you-
section
type
view,
one.
right, yeah, that is
Okay, thank you.
very expensive, because those are very, very tall,
And there's not enough space in there to plant.
right, to plant, but that would
Right.
give you complete coverage.
Right, and
And
that's
so-
not my intent.
You know, that paragraph, that's my interpretation. That's what you're asking. So we kind of need to maybe,
So when,
So if the parking lot was going in now, we would require a type 2 visual screen.
right. So it would be something like, what I would see is something like the bottom middle example with a fence behind it.
which is
And then
type
you've got
2.
trees, you've got the 6 trees, hawthorn and can't remember the other variety. And so what I'm suggesting is add some higher planting materials that will provide some additional screening for, not entirely blocking the fence, but just adding some more interest. That was the intent. So if we can figure out how to arrive in that place with a condition, that would be.
I would propose using our code language
That
to
would be
just make it abundantly clear. We say
Thanks.
exactly what that is, how many trees they need, what the percentage is.
So
makes
can
it,
is there enough space to do that? I don't want to condition something here that's not achievable, because it creates conflict with the other goals of the space.
So, okay, the 5-foot setback.
Is there the scenario where we can have them take the action to see if possible?
So we could say, so again, when we do these conditions, there's some reliance on the discretion of staff to use their judgment here. So I don't want to get too fixed. I
Sure.
want to allow, the intent here, though, is let's add some additional planting materials in there to provide some
I think the
separation.
type 2 visual screen is the way to go. I was just
Okay.
reading our code, and it is required in places where the setback is 10 feet or less. The entire setback area must be landscaped. So we would just be requiring a type 2 visual screen in that 5-foot landscaped setback area, and I think that would achieve
Great.
your goal without being too expensive and be something that our developer is all right with.
And that you can easily apply as code language. So I appreciate that. Okay, that will work for me. That amendment got on the screen.
Other discussion of the condition?
Second,
Commissioner Morgan.
the second agrees.
Okay.
Oh, I just edited it. I'm sorry. Do you want it with the maturity or just incorporate a type 2 visual screen?
Just the type 2 visual screens.
All in favor of the condition as proposed and edited? Say aye.
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 All opposed? Condition passes. Any other discussion or conditions? I'd like to propose a condition, I guess this would be 14, something like the following. Staff will work with Transportation Department to confirm that exiting the project onto Holly Street will preserve level of service D at the intersection of Rainier, is it Avenue or Boulevard? Boulevard, Juniper Street, and Gilman Boulevard. Discussion? Second, please.
I'll second it for discussion.
Second for discussion. Discussion of the condition.
Could you describe again, the intent that,
Right, the concern addresses the fact that turning left out of Holly onto Front Street North is prohibited. So the traffic heading toward I-90 from the development will take Rainier to Juniper, likely, right on Juniper and right on the Gilman intersection. That intersection is a special intersection across from the Gilman Loft. It has the scramble pedestrian crossing right there. It has a no turn on red. And I want to make sure, if you drive that, it's a challenge at times. And I want to make sure the traffic isn't queuing up on Rainier because we suddenly have 70 trips going down there, trying to get to I-90.
If I may.
That it seems that inability to turn left from Holly onto Front was not addressed in the current staff report, or it was not addressed. So that's my main concern.
So this site has 27 proposed units, which, as we understand it, should not affect the level of service at that intersection, but we will confirm with Public Works to make sure that that's the case. But it should not affect the level of service at that intersection.
Okay. So would it be acceptable then to the city to have the condition pretty much as I stated? I just want to make sure that that is addressed.
I would just say a condition's unnecessary.
Yeah.
We're going to confirm with CPD engineer and with Public Works engineering that is in fact correct. So it's one of those things where it's a code requirement, so you don't need a condition on it because it's not imposing anything additional on the project.
Okay, that's fine. Just so this transportation egress from that site is addressed. It seems as though it wasn't.
It's at the
really
top of my to-do list for tomorrow to reach
great.
out.
Okay, great. Withdraw that condition.
I'll agree.
Any other conditions or discussion? Hearing no other discussion on the main motion, all in favor of the main motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. This concludes the Front Street Townhomes development permit. Notice of decision will be issued by staff within 7 days. Moving on to our next item of business, City Council updates. I'd like to ask staff to provide any updates on City Council activities.
Hi, so first, this isn't a council update, but I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kristen Leeson, and I'm a principal planner with Community Planning and Development. I've been with the city since 2001, but I've always been in primarily the long range area. So, but I've worked with DC a few times. Commissioner Morgan and I have worked together several times, as well as Commissioner Brennan. So anyway, I will be your new liaison for this commission. And so if you all have any questions going forward, you can email me or give me a call too. I'm open to that. As far as council goes, last night, Thomas Valdrez, our senior transportation planner, took the light rail study plan to the Committee of the Whole Council. And we are kicking off our project to start coming up with alternatives for a light rail station. So stay tuned for those. Also, as you may know, our council member Hunt has been elected to state Congress. So she is the state representative. So she is headed off there. So there will be several public meetings coming up at which at the end of this time, they will appoint a new council member. So you may want to stay tuned and pay attention to those and perhaps get involved. Let's see. Oh, lastly, I would like to thank Commissioners Gilbert and Ikeda for attending the walking tour for middle housing. And is there anything that you all would like to share? I know council members attended. Is there anything you'd like to share with the commission, things that you maybe learned, discovered?
One thing I do want to point out, I did appreciate that there were so many diverse examples that we got to walk around and see. And also, not too many of them I thought were accessible in terms of like if somebody has mobility issues or maybe elderly and can't manage stairs. And so that was just something I noticed, that a lot of them are like, more of a townhome plan where you've got, 3 levels, and which are great, and will provide a lot of good housing. But I think Issaquah also we have just so many of those, and that's good, but we also need more variety, I think, just to fulfill kind of not just the missing middle, but also the little pieces for people who might want to age in place, have to move elsewhere. And that's just, one of my big takeaways. Yeah.
I think the one thing I was struck by was, there was a few of the duplexes, and they just fit into the neighborhood. They didn't stand out. Although their newer construction did up on the hill, but even then, it didn't look out of place. That's what struck me.
Both good things to hear. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
No other items of business? Okay. Thank you, Kristen, and welcome. There being no further business before the commission, I adjourn the meeting at 8:24 p.m.
This is post-meeting, but Mr. Chair, I have to say we are extremely lucky to have Kristen come back and work with us. So thank you very much for being here.